That you are welcome to come and go and enter and exit, but to please do so quietly, as of course we will have authors up here reading. After each of the authors this morning, there is a Q&A that will be moderated, and our moderator this morning is Dr. Kristen Figgins. I don't think I've forgotten anything, but I'm sure I will remember, and then I will say it when I do remember later. But thank you for joining us this morning, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Figgins.
Here, and then I'll be moderating a brief Q&A after each session, so think of what things you'd like to ask each of our authors. And we're going to begin our journey this morning with Drea Brown, who is a queer Black feminist poet scholar who serves as Associate Professor of English at Texas State University. Their essays and poems have appeared in literary magazines and scholarly journals such as the Smithsonian Magazine, Bellingham Review, Southern Indiana Review, and About Place, as well as in the anthology Stand Our Ground, poems for Marissa Alexander and Trayvon Martin. They are the author of Dear Girl, A Reckoning, winner of the Gold Line Press 2014 Chapbook Prize, and co-editor of Teaching Black, The Craft of Teaching on Black Life and Literature. And their monograph, Conjuring the Haint, The Haunting Poetics of Black Women, has been awarded the 2025 Eudora Welty Prize. Please join me in welcoming Drea Brown.
Hey. How are y'all? Those steps are steep, just saying. All right, so I was thinking how I wanted to do this. And I think I want to set you up in the beginning so you see how this book came to be, and then I'll take you to a couple of ghosts. Dear reader, these pages would not exist without the visitation of ghosts. There's no other way to say it. A book on the haunting poetics of Black women began with the haunting of one Black woman by another, and the poems that came from us both. In my first semester as a doctoral student, sitting in the back of some small seminar room, I found myself thinking of Phyllis Wheatley. There was nothing new about this. I wondered about her mother, about memory and smothered genius, and so I revisited the poem that ushered in the most grief and confusion on being brought from Africa to America. That poem has always had its hooks in me, this swift puzzle of crossing that too quickly lands at salvation. I could not leave it behind. It would not leave me alone. Each line a maelstrom, and I could not arrive safely at its end. What was I looking for? What did I need to see? I whispered this in a leaning ear that was there and not there, and asked her to show me. And now I'm reminded of the careful tongue of a dear friend who says, when we speak, every being is listening. So take care what you ask, dear reader. Some ghosts come when called and have more to share than you ever thought to wonder. She came in dreams, none of them soft. In sleep, my eyes were full of licking black water. I woke panicked and sore. I woke wet and in strange places around my apartment, in a corner wedged between a couch and closet door, balled beneath my desk, near the front of my bed, nothing like what I imagined. There were no whispered niceties from the sable muse. Instead, a girl's pointed finger dribbled in front of my face. A throaty whisper escaped her mouth, and it aches to remember. But I had called after all, and she had come with calls of her own. This went on for months, and I moved through in fits of strange and briny poems, many of which are found in Dear Girl. It is the ghosts that rise from those stanzas that laid the foundation on which this book stands. Haunting hurts. It is terror and fright and slack-jawed grieving, and even when it hurts, some ghosts can be a balm and bring you to the very thing you hadn't realized you've forgotten. So Conjuring the Haint aims to flesh out my otherworldly beliefs, because I think it's clear that I believe in ghosts. Ghosts can be a pathway of knowledge that leads to naming centuries of festering wounds and lead to pathways of redress and reclamation. I explore haunting as a state of being. I explore the figure of the haint and what I call haint elegies. And so the haint is a disruptive and ornery ghost, and here it serves as a complex spectral figure. It's a vernacular derivative of haunt, and the term haint can be traced to the Gullah people of South Carolina and Georgia. Here I view her steadily as Black, given the origin, as woman, given that women, and particularly Black women, are narrowly defined by similar terms when pushing back on the confines of our conditions. Through the haint, I trace the manifestation of harm and healing that are integral to Black women's lives and poetic renderings of grief. These are haint elegies. Through them, Black women confront the grief and systemic grievance of multiple forms of death: physical, psychic, social, emotional, and spiritual, while also using them to reclaim a complex subjectivity. So in the opening chapter of In the Wake on Blackness and Being, Christina Sharp, with care and brilliant precision, plumbs the expansive definitions of wake to carefully build a frame for living Blackness in the ongoing afterlife of chattel slavery, and to understand how slavery's violences continue to corrupt multiple dimensions of contemporary Black life. As Sharp puts forth, the wake insists on the non-being, the non-existence of Black folks, and our objection from the realm of the human. But wake is also about keeping watch with the dead. It's about the ripples left in the path of a ship, the consequences of something. It's about being awake and coming into consciousness. The wake troubles the flow from here to there, the boundary between property and person, Black life and Black death. Living in the wake means navigating the normalized and too often deadly forms of anti-Blackness that imagine Black folks as monstrous, as ghouls, and disappeared. Black death, writes Carla Holloway, is a cultural haunting. And to live among the dead in the afterlives of slavery is to live as and among ghosts, navigating the specters that problematize the matters of Black life and thrive on our non-beings. But while haunting ruptures or causes displacement and requires a confrontation, the ghost is evidence of memory, of injury, and loss. It's also simultaneously a process of understanding, a sense of feeling, and for me, the ghost is a way of doing things. In the wake, we tend to the dead and the rituals and rites that accompany it. While there is terror, there is an awakening, a coming to consciousness, working a fatal disruption. In this text, I view ghosts as powerless realms. Black women, like ghosts, reside in similar spaces. Hortense Spillers asserts that slavery passage between the human and non-human world. Was human-like, but more often mirrored for the society around her what a human being was not. And yet, something uniquely intriguing about passage. It is a site of transformation. Embodiments of fluidity, they hold past, present, and future all at once. Past case of Black women is a case of ghost. It is, I hope you're understanding that this is my quotes, right? It's a never even notice. Haunting suggests that something lies beneath or counter to. It is non-normative, outside of, in between. It suggests an othering and a recognition of that other. Haunting elicits a visitation of their call. Black women know about haunting and about being the haunt. We know what it is like to be feared and afraid, to be both the frightening thing and the terrified, to be the spook and Black women know what it means, what it looks like, what it feels like to occupy the space between flesh and phantom, to be the one haunted and the thing haunting. That's the haint. Haints are state. Black women refuse an apparitional silence. We don't just wistfully appear or disappear. And power, they articulate real pains and desires and refuse fully to be explained away as figments of diseased or troubled imaginations. In Ghost in Popular Culture and Folklore, Pulliam and Fonseca note that haints are various types of ghosts that are often considered to be disruptive. The three primary incarnations are the vengeful revenant, the hag, the banshee, that these manifestations can range from clear, definable human, definable and monstrous. Like haints, Black women are often relegated to frightening characters, vengeful when angered, hags when old, unmarried, or eccentric, banshees when loud or wailing, perhaps. But really, descriptors of Black women can really be relegated to these primary, flat and controlling images of Jezebel, the oversexed, Sapphire, the all-up-in-your-face banshee, and Mammy, the asexual hag. Black women are misnamed, haints are misshapen, and so much is done to quell the call that it may be difficult to hear or see that haints, like Black women, are calling for something to be done. In the wake, ghosts dare us to remember, call for us to do something, to work outside of these systems and tools required to uphold our own defeat. Being in the wake, being alive in the wake, means charting new ways to be, reimagining self and survival through creative modes of resistance. What I'm offering here is that Black women's poetry, Black women's haint elegies serve as a means of confronting the haunt and conjuring spirits in return that demand our survival. So now I'm gonna take you to some, and let's see how that goes. I'm gonna do this when I'm quoting, I'm gonna do this when the quote is over, okay? Each chapter pairs a primary stereotype of Black women with an incarnation of a haint. And in each chapter, I dismantle and refigure the two to see what can be found. This is the last chapter, a ceremony for Sapphire and rituals of repair and for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. This is a tale of two woeful haints, though only one is afforded tears. I tell them side by side because the attributes of one is a testament to the lack of the other, and it is the lack that I take up. Only after it is called out can we look toward healing what is missing and made mute. Who here has not heard of the wailing woman? Her sound is undeniable, heartbreaking, shrill, a lonesome, unearthly cry that pierces the dark. This is the banshee. Unique to Irish folklore, she is a figure some assume has always been, even when that origin is uncertain. She's a keener who persists in an afterlife of roaming grief, a displaced woman who has lost her family, a child perhaps, a mother or lover. Those who have seen her most commonly recall her beauty, this good-looking woman with flowing long golden hair who howls like a vixen fox or releases a miserable screech heard long before she appears. Despite some variations of sight and sound, the story is generally the same. There's a muffled cry or bawling. It shrouds a house. A woman appears, young or old, pale with flowing golden or white hair, a haunting beauty. And this can anesthetize fear. Generally considered a death messenger, the banshee makes herself known outside the family home. Whether it's immediate or a distant descendant, she circles the house. She appears near or raps on windows, and her presence and cry signals a loss looming inside. In her observation on banshees, Bettina Kempton recognizes the banshee as a woman who appears to be the epitome of the threatening aspects of womanhood. She is wild and disorderly and must be kept out of doors. The wildness of her grief, her public displays of disorderly mourning cannot be tamed or toned down. But while she's a woman outside and out of place, nobody tells her to leave. No one dismisses her authority or her reason. She is the spirit of the family, an intermediary between communities of the living and the dead. Banshee, in all her unruly malaise, is a community member, a family member that may be revered. Her presence and her grief are justified. So here's the second, Sapphire. For Black women, she is Banshee's closest sister. She too seems to have always been here, fervently waiting to be employed in the presence of flesh, but she has not ever been called a wailing woman, though her image ensures tremble. Sapphire makes it easy to manipulate the complex histories, emotions, and positions of Black women, flattening lament to unjustifiable rage, leaving in her place an abject haint. Popularized in the 1930s by the radio show Amos and Andy through her mean-spirited namesake, Sapphire is a pathological nag. A figure also proliferated in the 1965 Moynihan Report, which reinforced ideas of Black women as destructive and emasculating matriarchs responsible for community inequity and the principal cause of a culture of pathology that kept Black people from achieving equality. So Sapphire, too, is a death messenger. Her presence signals the death of the Black family, and it ensures her own. She proliferates an image of Black women incapable of vulnerability, unable to see beyond or escape their own unfounded anger. And what she says is of no consequence because her cries are already disparaged and out of tune. More adversary than intermediary, she is disruptive to the social order, responsible for any demise, and must be evicted if the family, as blood and community, is to survive. As Bettina Judd offers in Sapphire as Praxis, Sapphire produces a paradox by which Black women's knowledge and feeling is sequestered into chaotic impulse rather than controlled reasons. The insistence on her presence leads to the hypervisibility of Black women and contributes to the invisibility of wholeness. Her anger is a stupefying insanity that makes us difficult to see. No one recalls her face because she can be any Black woman. No one remarks on her beauty because Blackness gets in the way. Only the lunacy of her mouth and disembodied appendages, a wagging finger, rolling eyes, impossible angles of neck and machete tongue. This is the malady of Sapphire, a haint so ingrained that she is frequently thought to be real. While anger is powerful, hers lies only in the diminishment of Black women's knowledge and compound emotional lives. In the end, it is truly maddening to be both a reduction and an embellishment, to arrive anywhere and find a reckless ghoul has taken your place, virulent, hapless, and shamed. It's important to note here that dread is not Banshee's primary attribute. She undulates in sorrow because she has lost. And this incurable loss is rooted in love so charged that she grieves for eternity. Banshee is afforded the space to feel. She has a right to sorrow, to recognition and value. What I'm saying here is that it's Banshee's wail that magnifies Sapphire's lack. That to acknowledge the humanity of one haint is to recognize another rooted in negation and the Black women obscured in its shade. So I place these two haints side by side and position them alongside Ntozake Shange's choreo poem for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. This is a series of 20 connected pieces, and it should be understood as a single statement that combines poetry, prose, song, and dance to trace the individual and shared journeys of 7 Black women, each named for colors of the rainbow, notwithstanding the lady in brown, the colored girl desperately searching for her own light. Frozen by fragmented reflections and controlling images, each assists the other in moving toward an ancient power in need of reclaiming. They dance and sing and play childhood games. They cry, they call and respond to each other as they enact a series of routine acts that ultimately lead to redress. Through the rituals of For Colored Girls, Sapphire falls away and becomes her true self. Ordinary, brown, braided woman with big lips and big legs and full lips, regular, moving from phantom to flesh to the ends of their own rainbows. Black women daring to share their truth, to testify in the face of erasure is a radical and sacred act that initiates the ceremony of the Haint Elegy. For Colored Girls begins with dark phrases, a tenebrous brawl for somebody, anybody, to sing a Black girl song, to sing her alive and share her stories. And it's this invocation that leads to a cacophonous litany of what is missing and desired. And this begins with the lady in brown, right? Mistaken for Sapphire. On the opening pages, the stage notes reference her emergence from the dark into a dim blue light as she tries to revive other Black women locked in postures of distress. For the woman to be freed from stasis, the lady in brown must testify to those dark phrases of womanhood, of never having been a girl, to acknowledge a blinding grief in which Black women are often denied a full and vulnerable self. Never having been speaks to a lack of innocence, of play and pleasure. It speaks to a lack of formation and growth. There's no breath in never having been, just half notes scattered, without rhythm, no tune, distraught laughter fallen over a Black girl's shoulder. A rhythmless discord infects the body, creates a mocking hysteria in the melodylessness of the body as it flails and stumbles to move through debris, to be tossed over beer cans and shingles. And in this naming of the perception of Black women as unseen and unheard, in this song with no dancers, no lyrics, no voices, the lady in brown questions the sanctity of Black women's lives and brings awareness to haintly conditions in her wonderment. Are we ghouls, children of horror, the joke? And if so, then the wake must be the spook house. Then there's this refrain, don't tell nobody, don't tell a soul, which suggests then to be made a ghost is a private and silent suffering for Black women quashed under arresting interrogations of our humanness. Are we animals? Have we gone crazy? Without a full vision for self or salve for gnawing wounds, Black women are vexed with soft strains of death. So it's from this space of paralyzing injury and fear that the lady in brown begins to testify, begins to give witness to truth and power to her individual and shared experiences. In her howling testimony of Black girls and women's lack and disregard, there's a shift in energy and breath as the lady implores somebody, anybody, sing a Black girl song. the realization of which the lady in brown aims to bring into being. She aims to bring her out, to sing her rhythms, her caring, her struggles and hard times, to sing her song of life. These words are an invocation of desire to restore discredited knowledge, to actualize herself, to be wholly recognized and welcomed into the world as a multifaceted subject. And it's in this summoning of a new song that Black women's magic springs forth. It's in the wailing Black woman who must create lyric and tune to sing her song of life, because there can be no other creator. And in this calling out, she calls on herself, on the spirit of Black women, past and to come. She calls on something divine, a connection that has been lost in lifelessness, that is necessary for a warm rebirth. In this regard, as Omi Oshun Jones asserts, the act of conjuring brings into being something that would not otherwise have occurred. So to conjure here is to imagine, to create, to envision otherwise. In exploring this concept, Ace Sean Crawley suggests that to begin with the otherwise is to presume that whatever we have is not all that is possible, and a movement towards and an affirmation of other ways for us to be with each other, otherwise as plenitude, otherwise as irreducible possibility, capacity to be something else, to explore, to live fully, freely, vibrantly. By invoking otherwise visions of the self, the lady in brown opens a conjuration that calls for a remembering of Black women's multiplicities, a disruption of the rhythmless silence and centering of Black women's breath, her sighs, her possibilities. This new Black girl song serves as an oppositional discourse toward dwarfing narratives that animate the smear of sapphire. It is only after the lady in brown completes the call, this first testimony, that the other women come to life behind her, the necessary singers of a righteous gospel that will rebirth them whole and handled warmly. Thanks.
Hello.
Hello.
So there's a lot of things that struck me, but something I wanted to ask you is about how you constructed the book. I'm in a PhD program right now, and like half the stuff I read is painful to read, and I don't mean that in like a good way, like it's just dry. But what you've put together clearly is very scholarly and researched, but it sounds like it's your voice. And even though I just met you, like I can tell it's you speaking. So, and the quotes were helpful for me too, to think about like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that you're pulling from. So how did you balance all the other voices and like mold them into something that still sounded like you?
That's a great question. Okay, so this book started, as I mentioned, like in poems, right? And then became my dissertation. And one of the things that was important for me in turning it into a scholarly book was to make sure that it still felt like a poem, that it still moved in a way that feels natural to me, which was lightweight a challenge in trying to balance, I think, some of the language and voice that is required for scholarly works. I really wish I had an easy answer for this, but I guess the easiest answer for me is I refuse to compromise. I refuse to take the poet out of it. And which meant that, like, for my dissertation committee, I worked with people who are also artist scholars because they too understood what it meant to not compromise. And then my editors at UPM were great. And also we're like, oh, this is like a poem. And it's like, yeah, right? Can we do that? So I think there's still some language here that for me feels a little heady, but I think it is actually like talking through the poem that helps to ground it for me. I hope that did that. Thanks.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that really good question? I'm just curious to know who are the people that you worked with, the poet scholars that you worked with, and I also wondered, when I hear your voice that's simultaneously scholarly and also like beautiful writing, it makes me think of Saidiya Hartman, so I wondered if she's somebody that you're drawing on.
Ooh, okay, thank you. Who were the poet scholars that I worked with? So I was at UT Austin. I worked with Lisa B. Thompson, who's also a playwright. I worked with Lisa L. Moore, who is also a poet. Funky committee. I worked with Maida Jones, who is also a poet and scholar. And then I worked with two folks who are solidly rooted in scholarship, one in art history, Cherie Smith, and then Jennifer Wilkes, who is literature. Saidiya Hartman, yeah, so I, in addition to Conjuring the Haint, do a lot of work with Phyllis Wheatley and a lot of critical fabulation as well. So absolutely, Venus in 2 Acts did it for me. That made me go, oh, okay, I could do that. I do that, right? So I think Saidiya Hartman and other writers helped me to see, Imani Perry even helped me go, oh, okay, there's a space for this. This doesn't have to be as abstract or as some folks try and make it out to be, right? That there's a home for it. And I'll also just say, I'm thinking of Barbara Christian's Race for Theory, right? Where she says, you know, people of color have always theorized, but our theorizing is in dynamic forms, in our poems, in our songs, in our stories. And so this is a series of stories then, which means that there's always going to be some theory underlying. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. That's fair.
Can you talk about some of the maybe earliest haints that you learned about, even maybe before you started your scholarship and research, that drew you to the topic?
I mean, I'm just probably going to say her name over and over, but Phyllis Wheatley is the archetypal haint for me, right? This little toothless girl that somehow survives a middle passage where a third of those on board died, that took like almost a month longer than it should have to arrive, and then is named after the ship that brought her. There's so many questions. There's so much that she's carrying like in that small frame, and there's so much that she cannot say, right? And you know, there's that narrative that, oh, she's so young, she can't remember. No, this girl had mold in her lungs. This girl couldn't breathe the same after that voyage. There's memory there, right? The body holds memory, water holds memory, her name holds memory. And for me, that is a haunting thing, right? And the question that kept coming back for me with Phyllis was, where was her mama at? Who was her mama? Does she remember her name? Right? And so I think of Phyllis as a primary haint because she loses so much, and because in her poems, similar to that acrostic piece that you read last night, right? Like in her poems, oh, it's there. You have to read differently, right? You have to read the gaps. And so I think her poetry teaches me, or has taught me, ways of writing and reading and doing that help me to understand ghost in a different way. Not just as something that hurts, but, you know, like something that can be found there. right? When she being brought from, I'm so sorry. When she ended up being brought from Africa to America, it's like, 'twas mercy brought me. Okay, well, step back, because what is mercy? Who is mercy? Before she is converted to Christianity, you can't tell me that there's no belief there, that there's no God there. I can name several Orisha. I can name several spirits, right? So I think part of what Haints do is make us ask questions, right? What is mercy to a 7-year-old girl that survives a transatlantic journey that she was never meant to survive and has the audacity to name herself a poet? That's a ghost, man. Yeah.
I'm standing actually because I have a question.
Oh, okay.
I love this metaphor of haunting that you were like drawing off. I mean, it's more than a metaphor, and I love that you talked about conjuring.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if I mean, I'll find out when I finish the book, but I'm wondering if you talk about other things like possession and exorcism and things like this as well.
Sorry, I got so excited by that. Thank you. Yeah, I do. So I said each chapter I pair with the Haint and kind of refigure those ghosts. But the first chapter is about Claudia Rankine's Citizen, an American lyric. And I use that chapter as a way to try and teach readers to see ghosts. So I talk about, so much of Citizen comes through a lyric you as opposed to the expectant lyric I, right? And so I talk about that use of the lyric you as a kind of lyric possession, right? This ghostly black eye for, the lyric I is generally considered to be this universal form of intimacy, of closeness, and historically that I is white, straight, and male. So when you switch that lyric I to the voices of black folks who are hypervisible and invisible, it has a different weight. So the way that I think Rankine uses that lyric you, it is almost as if I must go through you to be seen, right? And so what I kind of offer there is that the reader becomes this unexpected but somehow willing, by opening the book, vessel for the ghost to come through. And so talk about that kind of view as a possession, not like, it's spooky season, not like The Exorcist or anything devilish, but more in terms of like a spiritual possession. And throughout Citizen, so many of the things that you experience are signs of possession, disorientation. You don't know who is who. Am I? Am I you? Where do I fit? There's a lot of physical response that readers have in and outside of the book that kind of correlates with this process of taking the ghost in, right? And you leave Citizen, the hope is you leave Citizen feeling different. Something has now changed because of what that lyric you has done to the body, to the mind, to your understanding of who is seen and unseen as Citizen. I hope that did the thing.
I tried to get here fast enough. I'm really obsessed with the subject of anger myself. Mm-hmm. And as you completed this work and studied Sapphire, mm-hmm. did that change how you express your own anger? Because we're all hear about the angry black woman. Mm-hmm. Can you be angry? Can you not be angry? I feel that as a woman myself. It's mm-hmm. invalidating. It's toxic to people. Mm-hmm. Like we get shut down with that. Mm-hmm. Did it change? Did your voice change as you did this?
Can I repeat back what I'm understanding and you tell me if I got it?
Sure.
You're asking, like, in work over the course of this book, and maybe in working with Sapphire in particular, like, did my relationship with anger change? Did how I express it change?
Yes. Did you find that you expressed yourself differently after being in this material for so long?
That's a great question. Did I find that I expressed myself differently after being in this material? You know, I'll go Audre Lorde here and say anything can be useful. Anger is a powerful, powerful tool when it is focused and directed at the very thing it aims to shift and change. And so I think in this process that anger is used creatively. It's a creative resource. And to be angry doesn't mean that you have to be chaotic or even destructive, but what are you going to do with it? And so I think this is what I'm doing with it. Because at the core of anger is some hardened hurt, right? It's some grief, it's some pain. And something has to be on the other side of that. So I think anger can be transformative. And so I especially like with this Sapphire chapter, I mean, that whole chapter is about rituals, right? It's about Black women not being alone, but also recognizing each other as salve and salvation, and what can be found when we are able to express our anger and transform our grief into joys, into touch, into recognition, right? And be handled warmly by each other. I mean, maybe that's my long route to say, yeah, I don't think I came out this book unchanged. I think if anything, I can articulate some things more than when I went in. Don't record this. I mean, I'm still angry, but I'm gonna still do something with it. You know, did that get it?
Like a fuel, almost, in a good, like a good
Yeah,
fuel?
absolutely. But also I recognize that anger is not my only fuel.
Yeah.
Love is my fuel. And sometimes at the root of that anger too is love. I'm angry because I love my people and because we deserve. Please don't post this on social media. I need my job. But you know what I'm saying? Like, anger is never as flattened as it's made out to be. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you.
Did that do it?
I get it.
Okay.
It's such a balance between how angry can I be before people stop hearing me?
Yeah.
And what I want to say sometimes is, no, there is love. Like,
Yeah.
love is so in this.
Yeah.
This is not just like unhinged rage.
That's right.
But also hear the rage, but hear the love, and hear that you want the fullness of what you're feeling to be heard.
That's right.
And sometimes I feel like that affects my voice and how I speak to people,
Yeah,
or how I express
yeah.
myself, because I feel like I'm always being looked at.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes our response to other people's perceptions of us is to shrink or to fit ourselves into whatever might be acceptable.
Sure.
That's not the easiest thing to do, and that can do a lot of damage and harm. And I'm not interested in harming myself for someone else's comfort.
Sure.
I'm interested in being the fullness of my light.
What a beautiful note to end that on. We have Addie E. Citchens up next, who is a native of Clarksdale, Mississippi, and a graduate of Jackson State University, who now lives and writes in New Orleans. Dominion is her debut novel. Her fiction has appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, the Oxford American's Best of the South, and among other magazines. And her story, That Girl, won an O. Henry Prize. She has studied writing at Florida State University and the Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop, and she is the inaugural recipient of the Farrar, Straus, and Giroux Writers Fellowship. In addition to writing fiction, Citchens served as music editor at Mississippi Folklife, where she became known for her articles on the history of the blues. Please join me in welcoming Addie E. Citchens.
Yeah, I can't stand following poets because they're so perfect. So, this piece I'm going to read from Dominion. I'm going to preface it a little bit. I don't know how many people have actually read the novel. Okay. So this is after he's killed a man, and he's been holding a secret. And the novel is written from alternating points of view, so I kind of had to cobble it together to get a long enough reading. So I'm going to start. And so this is after Wonder Boy, who is the star and the preacher's son. He's killed a man and he's ruminating his actions and the aftermath. Emmanuel, who had been holding his secret for over a week, went into his mother's bedroom to say, "Ma, I messed up," but he couldn't bring himself to say the words. For one, the radio was blasting, and his mother was half-dressed and so-called full of the Holy Spirit, so now he wanted to crush her. He shook his head to erase this train of thought. Stuff like this could get him sent straight to Whitfield, which he heard was as bad as if not worse than Parchment. Fortunately, his mother had not opened her eyes. He set her earrings down and returned to his room. He sat on his bed and thought on the aftermath. Oh, I forgot to say, he has recruited his girlfriend's brother to help him cover up a murder. Yancey kept saying that the Joker wasn't a bad guy. How the hell wasn't a crackhead a bad guy? It made him think of the Easter pageant one year. His brother Moshe was Jesus, the best they ever had, most people said. All Emmanuel knew was that they had to perform the Easter 4 times that year instead of 3 because of his performance. Trey was Judas, his brother Mac was Peter, his brother Ivy and himself were in the children's choir watching their big brothers and the other boys in robes on the long, rugged bench. "One of you will betray me," Moshe said with quiet resolution. The disciples stopped serving themselves dinner rolls and looked at Jesus in shock. Just then, Trey stuck his head in the bowl at the same time as Moshe, and the lights went dim. Except for a spot, he boomed out his solo, "Is it I, Lord? Is it me?" like his name was Paul Robeson. When he was done, there was not a dry eye in the house. The whole time, Emmanuel couldn't help but feel sorry for Judas in his situation. He was the most hated person in the Bible, and the only reason he did what he did to Jesus was because somebody had to do it. That day had been coming since the dawn of time, so why was he hated just for serving his purpose? Was that not honorable? And Trey was singing with the rightful emotion associated with the act of betraying a gentle, perfect man who only came to heal and save. The Joker, he wasn't innocent though, thought Emmanuel. He definitely wasn't innocent. The man was trying to extort him. He recalled something Shaka Zulu's mother said in the miniseries. Well, first, he remembered Shaka, whose fierce fitness reminded him of his father. But anyway, it would only be a matter of time before the Joker told somebody, and it would be like when or worse, when Champ made Money Parham drop out of school because somebody said he was watching junk in the locker room. Emmanuel went down on his knees, bowed his head, and clapped. He could find neither the right words nor the right approach. He thought about how his daddy might pray more jokingly. Emmanuel jolted from sleep, open mouth breathing. The rush before he'd excelled at something. Worry, though, he felt fear, an emotion he had grown highly unfamiliar with and averse to. He had done everything right afterwards. They had cleaned the bathroom, they washed in detail. He could have done all that stuff on his own. But Yancey had thought of the bleach, and he had spotted the Joker's red skull. Emmanuel felt he couldn't be too sure because they had never discussed it through the whole field trip. He jumped. "I will." Yancey was no more than a stretched across 5 feet 10 inches. Emmanuel could mangle him. Yep, he had to find Yancey, and maybe he would use Diamond for insurance. Since the summertime, and older and younger folk were still out about in pockets. Emmanuel didn't see Yancey around, not of the other spots a dude like him might hang out. He did find Katisha Wooden walking near 4th and Howard. Ahead of him, she hadn't graduated with her class in May. Still, he was surprised because she had been sort of quiet. He drove up to her, rolled down the window. "I need somebody to hang out with," he told her. "Don't you go with that girl, Diamond? You could go." His smile made her comfortable, and she slid, smiling, into the passenger seat. Small and cocoa brown, she wore a faded blue shirt with strawberries on it and a denim skirt. Meal. He asked her for a piece, and patiently he waited as she reached in her taste buds. His chewing sounds filled up his ears. Which he could tell. Who would have known that slow-ass Katisha Wooden would be hoeing? "I'm slow," she said. He chuckled long and loud to fill the car. "Katisha Wooden, I didn't know you were funny, too." The song seemed perfect for the occasion. Emmanuel sang along. He would shake her down all right. From the corner of his eye, he saw her relax a bit, lulled by the sound. He knew this was what he needed to gain his power back. What? Back to popping. He hated these hood-rat chicks. "I killed him because he was..." And I watched his eyes bug out. I didn't want him anymore. The girl looked like she was in a trance. "You crazy boy," she said. "I know." That night, for the first time in many, a double shift as a slot attendant at the Lady Liberty Casino, he felt as worn out and frustrated as he did. His Plymouth in front of his neat, pleasant brickyard home, and loosening his bow tie, he grabbed his bag and his fanny pack and got out of the car. It was after 4 and evening. Finding it empty, he stuck his key in the lock and pushed the front door open. His eyes had the disheveled living room ticked him off. His wife, Marcia, had left for work at 6:45 this morning, and these girls had put his son's head on his way to his daughter's. He shook the knob, but it was loud, and a ball so small. What's wrong, he asked. "She been like this all day," said Asia. "Get up," he asked. "She been like this all day," said Asia. "Get up, Katisha," he said. Jimmy was nervous, and he could tell Katisha was too. He was still clad in his work cummerbund and slacks, and could see the eyes and plush lips of the Reverend's wife, and he had to catch his bearings and speak to the pastor, he said. "Reverend Winfrey is not at the moment, but I am Mrs. Winfrey. Can I assist you in some way?" The man pulled the girl over the threshold and talked at her. "Look at her face. I just want you to see what you're crazy." She pointed toward the left window. "Chief Neighbors is 2 doors down on the there. If I didn't have a family to feed, become hella high more that this boy had spoken her name this way, like they were familiar." His mother took him by the hand. The woman said, "Do you know this young lady's son? Her father seems to think you hurt her." The boy's smooth face was shocked. "What? She asked me for a ride home last night, and as soon as she got into the car, she told me she would sell me some for $75. I told her I didn't roll like that, and she told me to drop her off in front of a house on Cherry Street. Someone else did that." "What, Jimmy Wooten lurch? He's lying, Daddy," were Katisha's first words. "Tish, I'm lying." Jimmy had worked full-time hours since he was 14 years old. His wife, Marcia, worked hard as hell, too. Asia was in the honors classes, and Reggie was doing 6th grade math in the 3rd grade. And here Katisha was, 18 goddamn years old, and all he and his wife had asked her to do was get a damn GED and a trade. He had always told his daughter she was pretty, and he hadn't been like his kinfolks who thought you ought to raise kids without compassion, like they'd been raised. He hugged his kids all the time, especially his daughters, because she had really been out there selling herself under his nose. The blood in Jimmy's head was bubbling like soup about to boil over. He realized all at once that he had been sweating and that everybody was looking at him crazy. Had he been talking out loud? "I'm sorry I barged in over here like this," he said with a voice that croaked. Me and my girl got some talking to do. Jimmy, the Reverend's wife, said, "Can I tell you that God heals? Can I tell you that he saves and he heals? Can I tell you that he saves and he heals and he chastens? Are you and your family in the church, sir?" The Wooten family already belonged to Macedonia Baptist, and although Jimmy wasn't a churchy man, he remembered hearing their boys singing at a revival back in '93 and having been moved to tears at their rendition of his mother's favorite hymn, "Somewhere to Lay My Head." He had seen this boy hurdle linebackers into the end zone on numerous Friday nights. He jammed to WDOZ early mornings on his way to work. He didn't want to roll with these people. They were everywhere. He didn't want his family's name dragged because whatever he done, whether she done whether he said or not, all it took was the idea to get out and about to ruin their name. Jimmy sighed. He decided they would tell her mama she had gotten to fighting, and even though that would still probably earn her a vigorous ass whooping, Marsha would kill this girl if she got a whiff of this other shit. Maybe he would kill this asshole, Wonder Boy they call him, Mr. Football, Mr. El DeBarge. Jimmy was a well-used 40, and he knew he didn't want to tussle with this big corn-fed nigga. He would have to shoot him. "Can I pray for you?" the Reverend's wife asked, pulling a bottle of holy oil out of thin air, it seemed to Jimmy and his bewildered girl. After the Wootens left, I stood outside the front door, staring out at the space where their car had been. Laser imprinted in my mind was a small brown girl, her marred face. I gripped a small medicine bottle of holy oil, not wanting to go back inside. In fact, I wanted to be far, far away from there and free like my friend Billie Jean, who divorced her husband when we were in our 20s and never looked back, never even thought about remarrying or having some damn children. She was always inviting me to go to this country or that with her, and I never did. I decided that if I got through this situation, I would start going with her and I might not come back. I went into my house and closed the door quietly. The boy waited for me in the living room. I took a deep breath but forgot to exhale. "Did you do those things to her?" I almost phrased it differently, like, "I know you didn't do those things to her, but I thought better of that." His face bore a hint of amusement, which I hoped I was imagining. "Do you think I did it?" Before I would have said no. None of my sons were capable of brutality, but now I really don't know. "Mama, you know." I sighed. "I have to call your father. I do not want you to leave this house." "I'm going to lift weights," he said, calling my bluff. "I'll be back when he gets home, and I will accept my punishment then. Oh, and Mama, that's not all I have to tell you." He was gone, and I let out my pent-up breath. Instead of calling Saber, I took a couple of nerve pills and let myself into Emmanuel's bedroom. The room was neat as a pin. Trophies and plaques for this and that glittered all over his bureau, and in the case his daddy got built for him. The twins were tidy, but Emmanuel was fastidious. I almost didn't want to touch anything, but I needed to figure out what he had going on, or he'd end up like them white boys that shot up that school. Beside the bed on his nightstand were his student Bible and a small, curled, weather-beaten notebook. I opened it, and on the first page a name was printed in a tight-fisted penmanship. A title, Tales of a Joker. What in the world was this boy doing with the Joker's notebook? I opened the top drawer in his nightstand, found nothing unusual. In the bottom drawer was a box of newspaper clippings of his achievements, and under it was a locked box. I removed it, picked the lock, and found sealed envelopes, 8 of them, each labeled and numbered in Emmanuel's small, neat handwriting. I picked out one and saw its middle bulge. It wasn't slim and flat like an envelope should be. I squeezed it and knew there was something fabric on the inside, something soft. Without opening a single one, I replaced them, all the while blocking my mind's attempts to decipher its contents. This boy feral, I thought, wild. And though I felt bad for thinking it, I also couldn't help but know that whatever he'd done, they managed to blame me. They always blamed the mother. I waited in the den for Saber to get home from Friday evening choir rehearsal. For some reason, I was nervous like it was me who was in trouble. Honestly, I don't remember the last time Emmanuel landed in any sort of formal mischief. Scuffles on the football field maybe, but never had he failed a class or been suspended. So all of his misbehavior was new, but considering what I had seen of him and his girlfriend, perhaps the behavior was just new to me. At 8:15, I heard Saber's keys in the door. I heard his steps in the vestibule and called to him as he was set to pass where I sat in the den. "Can it wait?" he said. "I got a word I need you to set down." "Absolutely not," I said. "This cannot wait." As I spoke, he looked off in the distance and stroked the ash on his chin. "Scylla," he said. He dropped her off. "Did you stop to think that our son might have been telling the truth? It's not like he has a track record of his behavior. I know you have your issues with me, but not an ounce of grace for your son is surprising." You had to hear his tone of voice, Saber. "Do you think I did it?" he said. "And then that's not all I have to tell you." "What do you think that meant?" "That sure don't sound like innocence to me." And he walked right out of here when I told him not to. Lord knows I haven't been able to get his tone of voice off my mind or her face, Saber. He bit her, damn it. He bit her hard enough to tear her flesh. Saber appeared to be seriously mulling it all over, but who knew what was going on in that great vast space between his ears? "Where is the boy now? Did Jimmy Wooten leave a number? I want to call so I can get us together and we can straighten this out as soon as possible." If it did happen, it sounds just like a case of boys being boys. That's not at all what this is, Saber, not at all. That poor girl looks stricken. "Well, what are you saying, Scylla? That you believe there's something wrong with Emmanuel?" "Yes, seriously wrong, and it's been under our noses the whole time." "Scylla, you sure you ain't had one pill too many and just need to lay down?" "No, Saber. I'm clear as hell, and if you don't do anything about it, there won't be anything that can be done." "There's always something that can be done. A sermon," he said, "the word." He raised his hands like that made sense. "Find me a scripture, Priscilla. Type me something good up." Okay.
We have, I think, about 15 minutes for questions. If you'd like, again, there's 2 microphones on either side of the
Hello.
Hello. So we've been discussing your book all week. We're in there. When I was reading the book, I listened to the audiobook, so to hear the sermons to the audiobook because it had like the choir playing along with the pastor preaching. I thought that was really cool. But I wanted to know, like for you, what was the importance of having those little inserts of the sermon, and would the book come off differently if they weren't there?
I think it would have come out differently if they weren't there. The importance of me, Priscilla has given up her aspirations, her goals for having a family and a husband. So she's a writer in her head, and she's the one writing up these sermons for him. So it's her voice. It's the way she gets to be heard. And this is her way of kind of asserting herself in a like, you know, nothing. She feels like she's voiceless. She feels any agency in her marriage. So this is the way she asserts herself. So I thought it was important to include those. Also, when I was a child, there was a small town that used to include these notes, and I was fascinated with them. And so you answered the question. So that kind of thing just stayed in my head. And so it just fit for me, especially.
And them, and they were like little passive aggressive messages in there.
Right, that's what
I'm a playwright, and I can spend hours naming people instead of actually writing. And so I was fascinated by the names that you used, and I wondered, like, if you would speak to that.
You know, people find stuff after the fact. Some of them were intentional because he was a reverend. You know, he chose biblical names for his son. But his name, Saber, I don't know where that name came from, but it just stuck. Yeah, and it just stuck. So it wasn't really intentional, that one. But, you know, the son's name were definitely intentional. I used Winfrey because I need Oprah Winfrey to put her book list. And it probably should tell her something too. So yeah, they were, you know, intentional and not intentional. You really don't think a lot about how it would be processed after the fact. So much in your own head. So yeah, it was and it was not. Some of them were.
So the part of the book that you read comes about 2/3 about how toxic masculinity gets created, right? I read that as being a really important part of but a thing that I keep as part of that productive uncertainty that we were talking about is whether Emmanuel is whether he could have been redeemed somehow. Like, is this he's a kid, he's 18 years old, but he's also, you know, as we heard in this section, so monstrous and scary, right? And I thought in particular on page at the very beginning of what you read, when you write, Emmanuel couldn't help but feel sorry for Judas and his situation. He was the most hated person in the Bible. And the only reason he did what he did to Jesus was because somebody had to do it. I wondered if that was kind of a comment on Emmanuel himself. Like, are we supposed to imagine, like, is there an intervention that could have made this kid different?
You know, it was the original version was quite different. The ending was quite different. And I think, you know, I had a lot of living to do to be able to end the novel, because the novel was written over a decade ago and it had just been sitting collecting dust because I didn't know how to rectify the ending. So, you know, it just took years, and you wonder, like, with people who are predators early on, like, how much of it's, okay, well, he may redeem himself, or he may just go through and, you know, wreck a whole bunch of more people's lives. And the story is based on this concept that, well, this truth that a person who is a man who is a rapist rapes the average of 7 times before he's caught, or before somebody, you know, he's formally caught. And so that went, you know, so if you do that, it's like this, you know, it's a habit by now. And so you wonder, can that be rectified? But, you know, sometimes you don't have the, you know, you can't wait to see sometimes, you know, because that means harm on so many others. So I don't know. In the other story, he was and was not redeemed in the first version. You know, we knew that he lives, but he's not, you know, he's the same person. And I just didn't think that was fair to the community, that, you know, he could still be, because so often predators in our community get to go on and live their lives, while people around them have to look at them, have to hear people praise their names. So, you know, yeah.
And he's so canny about who he can and can't get away with hurting, right?
Absolutely, he knows that. It's you know, he's very calculated, and that was parts. And one of my favorite, like I said, I based him a lot on that guy, Christian Bale's character in American Psycho, that calculated yet laxness about how he approaches his crimes.
In the passage you read us, Priscilla had this dream of going off with Billie Jean and not coming back, and you end the novel with Priscilla having a very similar vision of leaving town and leaving the bullshit behind, as she says. What is it about a town like Dominion that stifles the dreams of women like Priscilla and Diamond?
I think it's patriarchy. You know, this idea of all you can be and all you can evolve into is based on what you can be to a man and your children. And so if you're there, you either have to participate or, like Drea said, you become a hag. And you're down for being that, you know. So there are certain roles that you're expected to fulfill in these small towns, and that can feel like a prison sentence. And so it's, you know, it's not often that you can be your fullest self in those places. And I think both of them were yearning to be that.
So going back to the idea of would it have been possible for Emmanuel to have been redeemed? It seems that you're making a case here for nature versus nurture, because Priscilla and Saber have other boys who don't turn out like this. Can you comment on that? Was it nature versus nurture? Was he just a bad seed?
Well, I don't know, because he's also a star in a way that those other brothers weren't. They were good kids, but he excels at everything. And so with, you know, that black wonder boy thing, you get entitled. Just like, you know, with black capitalists, you know, you're entitled. It's this perception that you're entitled to whatever other bad rich people do, you know. So I think the thing is that, you know, we all have a responsibility to each other and to our community. And I think he was able to exist outside of that because people thought he was so wonderful. So, yeah, I think it was basically nature and nurture for him. And y'all know how it is when you have a bunch of kids and that last one always gets away with everything, you know. Because when I was young, my mom told me I could go to the prom, but I needed to be back at 11. And I'm like, the party ain't even started by then. So my sister came home the very next year. She came home at 4:30 in the morning. So it was just that kind of thing, is that I wasn't pushing those boundaries. And so there always is that kid that is willing to do that. And he was willing to do that. And he was glorious. He was a king among boys. So
I wonder if he also just sees through his dad's hypocrisy more than his brothers do.
I believe he does too, but he also loves that power.
Yeah.
And you know, power is a thing that's addictive to people, especially bad men.
I was curious because of the heavy biblical themes that are going on, whether we were supposed to view Manny as evil, like something almost supernatural evil, biblical evil, or did you have a diagnosis in mind when you were writing him? When you mentioned American Psycho,
Yeah.
it makes me think you might have. What would his diagnosis have been if he had one?
You know that, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist. I do diagnose myself all the time and got a lot of issues. But, yeah, I think he's a psychopath. I think he's narcissistic, you know. And I was writing with that in mind, especially with the flat way that he perceives these people he's attacking, this detachedness, this idea that they are... When you can harm a person in the ways that he harmed people, there's a certain way you have to think of those people. Like in the instance of you can send a bomb 1,000 miles away, you have to think a certain thing or not think certain ways about people that you can bomb, you know, in a detached way. So I think, you know, that's all like some kind of sociopath, you know. And I think, yes, I was definitely thinking of, and I have a little cousin that's very strange, so if he turns out to have been, he's also deeply in this character too. So if he turns out to be on the news, that's part of it, yeah. I don't want to say his name, but yeah. Mm-hmm. All right.
Our next author is Kathleen Driskell, who serves as the 2025 to 2026 Poet Laureate of Kentucky and as Professor of Creative Writing and Chair of the Naslund Mann Graduate School of Writing at Spalding University in Louisville. Goat-Footed Gods is her 6th collection of poetry. Her other collections include Blue Etiquette, Next Door to the Dead, Peck and Pock, Seed Across Snow, and Laughing Sickness. Individual poems and essays have appeared in The New Yorker, Rattle, River Teeth, Appalachian Review, The Southern Review, Shenandoah, and other magazines, and been featured at Poetry Daily, Verse Daily, and American Life and Poetry. Please join me in welcoming Kathleen Driskell.
Thank you all so much. Thanks to Chris and Kendall and Dr. Miller for putting on this fine symposium. I'm so honored to be here. And thanks to all the foundations that gave good money to have us all here. I'm happy to meet new writer friends and to share the stage with them. And I'm just really humbled by this whole experience. So when I published Goat-Footed Gods, I realized probably too late that I had written a kind of informal trilogy. And this trilogy is anchored around the mile or so around my home. My husband and I bought an old country church. We were really poor when we came back from grad school, and we had a toddler, and we stumbled upon this place. And we've lived there for 30 years now. And it's always been just a wonder to me that we were stupid enough to do it and smart enough to do it. At the same time, it had been abandoned for some time. And when we first began to remodel it and tear down all the horsehair plaster and see what was underneath, sometimes neighbors would come by and they would tell us about this new community that we had moved into, which is thought to be haunted in a lot of ways. So that created an interesting tension for me. I'm not a believer. I'm just not made. I never was. When I was 3 years old, I remember sitting in a Quaker church and thinking, this isn't for me. So I do believe in the divinity of the imagination and creativity. And I do believe that we can be haunted by things. And so Seed Across Snow is sort of about my house, but also the things that seemed to, even though I wasn't a believer, began happening around my house. 2 young teenage boys were drowned in the creek. That was usually not much more than a trickle that ran behind our house and down the road. And after a great flood, they were in a canoe, and the canoe flipped. And obviously, that was incredibly tragic. A house burned down that was near us. And my neighbor was hit by a car, the neighbor that lived right across the street from us. And so I want to read a little bit from Seed Across Snow. It's a poem called Overture. And it's kind of a collage poem, and it is made up of little snippets of things that are further talked about in other poems that come later. I will tell you, it's a not short poem. How's that? Okay. So, Overture. It's the first in the collection. Oh, come see what has been planted, how one woman harvests this night dark seed. Once, through the chalky bones of sycamores, the sheriff and the man, the father, looked down upon the hull of an overturned canoe knocking against the shore. In the swollen current, rotting apples washed by, their families holding fast within their bruised hearts, and I remember that, and I remember, too, how it was raining the day. We sat in the school buses. I should say that these new griefs have a way of bringing up old griefs too, so there are a lot of things about my memory and my childhood in here. their families holding fast within their bruised hearts. I remember that, and I remember, too, how it was raining the day. We sat in the school buses, the silver windows and their glassy bubbles, and the way we were tossed forward, and we laughed until the sirens commenced. Murmurs rose. The children were asking, what's happened up there ahead in the road in front of the school? But we were so young then, it only took a week or two for the sound of brakes and sirens to draw away. And in art class, we returned to replicating our masked selves in chalk portraits, faces of children who seemed to have forgotten what they had seen in the road. It was as if nothing had happened until the man who came to install our carpet. So familiar, I thought, as I picked up book bags, shoes, and coats. Oh, of course, I'd gone to school with him. We laughed, finally recognizing that. Did we know anything then? Remember Mr. Blackburn, Mrs. Klein? I had just realized I had thought of his brother, having read in the newspaper his name with the priests, but I knew enough to tamp that back down. Our children as old as the two dead girls, and we as old as the bus driver, whose wiper swished and swished, but God help him, he could not see. Who could see that? And I recall other breaks and tires skidding and running, and I remember running through the snow, how it crunched beneath my feet, and how my chest went, huh, huh, huh. How a body lay between the front tires. A young woman, all elbows and hands, danced awkwardly in the road. She screamed while a red envelope scuttled across the road, and I turned back to call 911, and I ran toward the bland pink faces like cabbage roses, pressed against cold glass. What did I say? I knelt down deliberately. Mrs. Hallie, stay here, stay. I yelled, pitching back the small words as I ran off again, and then I saw her shoe in our yard, and shoes spin through air, and apples bob, and canoes knock hard, and red envelopes flutter like red birds aflight. She'd come across the road to fetch her mail, and in her mail, a Valentine. And I remember tucking the blanket around her and thinking, oh, Regina, you're already dead, aren't you? Though I began to chant, it's okay, I opened up the words, cracked them open, and watched their little green puffs float up. Words are like little spirits that way, and I remember blood splattered like seed across snow, and how without notice it melted away and washed down the road. And I remember the pressed faces of my children as they stained against the glass. If I must remember our home is a church, then I must also remember its lawn is our graveyard. So the vet called it a tumor, and the old dog was carried home. Blankets came down from the hall closet to make a nest where our children slept with him one last night. Grief settled into the bones of Wyatt and Quinn, and when the dog was carried back out and put into the car, their bodies became houses they did not think they could live within. And my great-grandfather was driven from his house, and once at the railroad bridge, they found his plow horse tied to the trestle, and they found my great-grandfather's trousers, then his shirt folded, his socks pulled into each other, shoes faced, pointed as if in a soldier's closet. Then, 2 days later, his body bumping against the Kentucky shore. The skiff rocked as the men stood to gaff him out of the cold water. And once, a detective showed me a photograph. You know him? I recognized my neighbor, but took a minute to consider my answer. What would come if I said yes, if I said no? A girl had crawled across our lawn and up our neighbor's gravel drive, where all night she bled inside the gold egg of their vintage gold Cadillac. And once, in a room with periwinkle walls, the heavy matelasse spread collapsed to the floor. which was maple yellow and gleamed. And once traffic flowed lightly below. I remember it was Sunday and a sheer white curtain blew into the room. I could see the edge of my suitcase in the closet. And once a bride's veil flew over the farmland of blue grass. And once a bride sat beside a pool and a black champagne bottle bobbed in the current. And once someone said, "Shh, don't you move." And once my neighbor was resurrected from rehab and returned home wearing a stainless steel halo. But she didn't know I had saved her life, nor that I was her neighbor. And in a storm outside our house, she stood in a dark skirt that blew from side to side like a church bell. She looked up toward the luminous red lantern of my son's window, and I remember opening the door, and I called, "Regina, are you all right?" And she didn't answer, but finally she drifted back home, and I went upstairs, and I slept on the floor of my son's bedroom, where I heard my daughter sleepwalking through the halls. She moved like a child who knew things, and I knew I had walked the same way. And so I watched her and I wondered who had told her these things and when. When had I not been around? When I was her age, I lay on the flowered davenport at my grandmother's home, and she told me things no child should know. But still, I wanted to know. Women were beaten so that their faces held the purple blooms of late roses. Men drank themselves to tears so that they were not men to the women who had lived with them. Aunties drank lye then, and it was always about shame, as it always is, but also about living story. I recall that now, and I recall everything. For what do we have but the past to parent us? It has been told because this yellow morning my little daughter shook me awake and asked me to write a poem for her. What shall I call it? I asked, raising on my elbows. She put her finger on her lips and looked to the ceiling. A moment later she said, "I think you should call it The Rain Comes Wild." And then the rain began to peck and pock. With the church comes a graveyard, and so there's a little graveyard next door. It's very humble. I think when people see it, they're kind of like, "Oh, that's it?" But before we moved in, it was a place where teenagers came and knocked over the headstones, and so we kind of feel some ownership over it in some ways, although it's not ours, and we do not have to mow it, thank goodness. I have imagined the lives of people there, and I've been sort of haunted by them in that way. And so this is, Next Door to the Dead is the second book, I think, in the trilogy. So I'll just read a couple of pieces from this to give you the flavor. This is called Living Next to the Dead Acre. The preacher who sold us the old church said, "Shah, ain't nobody been buried there in years, no fears. That little cemetery's been full up long ago." But we'd only lived there a month. We're still washing dishes in the ladies' room sink when I drove home in sleet to find a hearse, its doors agape, brass handles on a casket, the casket sliding out. I slid in behind the long row of cars and parked as if I belonged there. I did my best to hush the rustle of grocery store bags, to hush my kid trying to kick free from his car seat. He bleated to be let loose, to be allowed to join that party. I held him so tightly he yelped. At the tall vestibule doors, I struggled with and cursed my new sticky key. Behind me, small purple flags flapped in the wet wind, banners pronouncing the new patriots of this strange country. This poem is called Death of the Civil War Infantryman, Mill Springs, Kentucky. In the cold mud oozing, I lay, looking up into the fingery reach of wet tree branches. One glides down, then another, what? Redbirds, cardinals, light on limbs. The sky, gray, infinite, approaching. Each bird sudden, unexpected, like sudden bloom, sudden blood blooming through the chest. A flock has settled in the tree. They are like Fanny's precious red glass bulbs. They came from Cincinnati on the riverboat. She held them in her lap. A small, raw wooden crate stuffed with straw. Careful, careful, she warned. The slow nod of the horses out front, heading for home, clicking. I hear the ticking like a clock. Expensive, foolish, but pretty. Glass glittering in a leafless tree. Leafless tree. Through the sleet, a song. Sad, so sad. No, not a song. The low moaning of our Messiah. Wedding ring. She said, my darling green and slick fish of a daughter, still sealed tight, I unwrap this to show you, the only one left behind with me, not to give a perfect circle, the fine minister said at the altar, when it was slipped upon me, did the slip upon me, and now here it is, walked off my thin finger, forever, perhaps, and yet somehow still at home, now in my palm. See, look at this, a heavenly loop. It's a butterscotch on the wet tongue, halo around the sly lamppost on a cold, rain-flung street. Gin ring at the stemmed base of a quick martini, green olive left behind with pimento sucked out, full ripe kiss remembered on a cocktail napkin, the bombast and charming lure of a shining hoop snake rolling, dark rolling out of a dream, just one swinging handcuffed, yet left at the bedpost, yellow frost around the stunned eye of the gaffed sailfish, stiff lens of spyglass, burnished beetle spinning on its back, seen only once, the tree has fallen. After lightning has struck, that delicious winking secret, delicious and yet untold, that winking secret that begs to be fished out of its deep and narrow hole. Perhaps you are who you think you are, or perhaps you are your mother's daughter, or perhaps you are your father's. Know this now, standing here in the bright triangle of moonlight on the knotted floor, there are some rings woman shouldn't hand down to daughters, shouldn't mind misplacing, should not stoop to unwrench the kitchen pipes to retrieve, but rather, and merrily, should allow the faucet's full cold flush to carry them off into the swift current of mean and sour rivers. So just one more from this earlier work. This is called Why I Mother You the Way I Do. It's for my daughter, who's now 30, but she was 13 at the time, and she was mad at me because I wouldn't let her do something stupid. Why I mother you the way I do. That afternoon, I have to admit, there were no thoughts of you. I was in high school, making my way past the buses to a waiting car, a boy who would not be your father. When the line of traffic stopped, the girls, classmates, sisters, had darted between buses and into the highway, trying to cross the field to their home. They both lay twisted in the road. My science teacher, Mr. DeSaro, took off his suit coat and laid it over Susan's face. He was crying because he only had one coat. By the time they let us pass, Eve had been covered with a white sheet. The ambulances had come. Red lights flashed, but their mother was still pushing her silver cart through the grocery. The sheriff was walking up behind her. As she reached for a gallon of milk, he moved to touch her arm. So this book, that some of you have been so kind to read, there's an old train trestle that is at the end of our road. It's about 8 stories high and it looks decrepit. And since we've lived there, 5 young people have been knocked off of it to their deaths below. And so most recently was a young girl, and there's a sort of makeshift memorial under the trestle that I pass because it's actually part of the park that's very near us under the trestle. And I'll read a couple of epigraphs from the book itself, and that will sort of place things in context for your help. Despite the warning signs and a tall fence that separates the trestle, Pope Creek has had several accidents and deaths, some possibly related to looking for the goat man. This satyr holds the tragic distinction of being one of the most dangerous mythical animals in North America. That's because he has actual deaths attributed to him, this cryptid. And that was read from the Washington Post, April 26, 2016. And then a 15-year-old girl dies in yet another train accident on the Poplick Trestle. Headline, Louisville Courier-Journal, May 28, 2019. The trestle is haunted. The trestle is haunted by a goat man. He is not carrying a Bible, nor any sacred book, nor is he wearing a priest's collar. He's not wearing clothes at all. His eyes are not blue like Jesus's. He has no hair, though he is covered in fur, and gnats circle his head and horns like a gnarly halo. Some say he swings a bloody axe. Have you seen a photo of goats sleeping in trees, or the video of a goat walking upright through the streets of India? Like a man? Then you may be able to see what is not there, too, at the trestle. What is not there is what will kill you, knock you dead, into the field below. From the trestle, tall as an 8-story building, which is also not there, but is nevertheless as deadly to fall from. After the fall. At the park path near my home, my dog stops always to sniff around her makeshift memorial, a plastic wreath, a laminated poster with her photo at the foot of the train trestle from which she fell. I look up 90 feet towering over, the equivalent of falling from a building with 8 floors. Each time I pass by, I wonder what in the world could have urged her onto the tracks that night. What thing was she looking for, and did she find it before she heard the whistle? Had she not stepped onto the trestle that evening, had the train not been coming, perhaps she'd be living in a dorm that high. There's a tower like that at the university my daughter attended. Or the girl might be working in an office building. When time for her break, she pushes back from her metal desk, catches a glimpse down 8 stories to the street below, all busyness stopped for a moment at the red light. the delivery trucks idling, the bicyclists balancing, keen to wheel on. Perhaps forehead on cold glass, she shudders, feeling a little dizzy. What might that fall be like? At whose feet might she land before? Someone hurrying home with a birthday cake with blue icing or a bouquet of hydrangeas. And what of their celebrations then? We hear the sirens while out on the screen porch, rosé wine in hand on a warm Saturday night, dog curled at our feet, when in a fallow field beneath the trestle, the policewoman, our neighbor with teenagers of her own at home, or so she thinks, walks toward a patch of crushed blonde grass. In the byline of the newspaper article, the next day I read the name of my student. She's the reporter called to talk to witnesses. She makes notes standing beside the stream that has always run under the trestle. A slow rain begins to pock the water. We hear it too, striking our porch's red metal roof. At the same time, I was thinking about following. My daughter had a traumatic accident. She was on a second-story deck celebrating the birthday of her best friend, and the deck collapsed. And there were 5 of them on the deck, and she was hurt most severely. She came straight down in a chair and shattered her T12. She's ambulatory now, but I was thinking about, in putting this book together, well, the book's about a lot of things, as I hope my books are, but thinking about the idea of falling and also the idea of going out and looking for evil when, we should just thank our lucky stars for what we have today. So this is called Moped. She's down the hall on the MRI table when she's wheeled into the emergency room bay, when he's wheeled into the emergency room bay, and the nurses pull the thin yellow curtains around him as if that offers any privacy. I hear him cry out, groaning as the orderlies lift him onto the bed. 40 minutes ago, he was a boy on a moped buzzing home from his dishwashing job. The emergency room is a strange place, not at all what I'd thought. There's no urgency here, only what seems like nonchalance and laughing, so much laughing and shouting. The nurses and doctors and orderlies speak to the damaged as if we're underwater. And so how can I help but hear it all? What's happened to the boy? A shattered leg they were trying to save, his whimpering, his calling out for his mother. They yell that they're going to have to put him in traction, and he must hold still for the drill. Do you understand? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hold still? They take his whimpering for a yes, and why wouldn't they? Here we're all yielding, none of us yet understanding what we're about to surrender. And then I'll finish with this poem from Goat-Footed Gods. It's near this beginning. 6 hours lost, land between the lakes. Long after dark had fallen and the trail left behind, long after the dog I had chased into the unfamiliar woods disappeared, she long gone into oaks and hickory and brush, and likely back asleep on the porch of my new boyfriend's cabin, I saw a fire in the distance and walked toward it. There in their camp, orange light flashing across rough bearded faces, creased in dirt, unruly feral hair, tin cups in grimy hands, like that movie. Relaxing, they mocked and jabbed at each other after a long day of timbering. Nearly all jumped up when I wandered in, but the youngest, a teenager, stayed seated, continued pawing at the ground with a hatchet while I spoke, as if he were embarrassed. I was about his age and pretty enough, if that ever matters, and alone in the woods, completely soaked in fear, finding no real relief in discovering their camp. I counted quickly. There were 8 of them. Their eyes as astonished as mine that we were there together. We were there together, miles away from everyone and everything in the middle of the night dark woods. They huddled for a few moments, looking over to eye me, and then back to hushed talk. Finally, 2 set down their whiskeys. It had been determined. They would be the ones to drive me back. The drive was quiet, but for me, in the middle of the cab, pointing out turns. When I stumbled from the old logging truck into the washing blue lights of the sheriff's and deputies' cars, I rushed into the arms of a man I would only date for a few more weeks. It's good to remember this kindness of men, especially in the times we are living. Thank you.
So thank you for that reading. I'm honestly still in the poem where the girls have gotten run over, and that last image of the sheriff reaching out his hand, like I haven't left it, I'm in it. So my question is about endings. It seems like you have that ability to find the perfect ending for a poem, which is hard to do. How do you get there? How do you know it's over? And does the ending come first? How does it work for you?
I tried to write that poem, actually, for probably since the event, and I'm sure it's one of the reasons why I became a writer, one of the reasons. It's a salient image in my mind. I'll never forget it, and I kept trying to write it, and I had to put it down because it just wasn't good enough. I wasn't writing something good enough for that moment for me. But many years later, when this thing happened with my daughter and she ran up the stairs screaming, "I hate you," and slammed the door, the title came to me, and it was a way to not be so directly into it. But obviously the poem is about that moment that all parents, all people fear. Your life is one way, and then you step over, and it's never the same way again, and sometimes that comes with intolerable grief. And so I can show you the poem later, but it's almost written like an Italian sonnet. And at the end, so the lines are all about the same, and at the end, that last line takes up half the space. Because I remember being consciously willing of not going into that space for her. I was not going to take that mother into that space because it was intolerable for me, and my grief is this much. It's a drop of water compared to the oceans of grief that she surely had to be feeling. And so it was all about that kind of strategy. And I remember being very satisfied with that ending because of that and being real sure of it. Sometimes I'm not so sure. And I'm constantly telling my students, "Oh, you've written past your ending," right? And oftentimes you'll find it a few lines back, as oftentimes you'll find your beginning a few lines in. So that was wise. So thank you for asking me about that. And thank you for your keynote last night. I just thought it was wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I loved the ending to Moped where you say that none of us yet understanding what we're about to surrender. You move me over and over with the way you explore those moments that transform us forever. When did you start noticing those moments and feeling them like you do?
Thank you. I have a poem in Next Door to the Dead that I wrote. I was thinking about Ashley about this yesterday when you were talking about that poem affecting you, and a poem you had written or a poem you had read when you were 7 or so. Yeah, you read. Well, I had a teacher when I was in the 3rd grade who asked us to write poems, and I had no idea what that meant. And so all the boys wrote about, I'm sorry boys, they wrote about matchbook cars or used the metaphor of the toilet and the throne together, which is hilarious. So, and actually if you've ever taught intro to creative writing, you've seen those poems still, right? Okay, so, and the girls are writing about being ballerinas or princesses. So I wrote a poem, it's the only poem I know of mine by heart, and it went like this. War is bad. It makes me sad. When my uncle gets home from Vietnam, I will be glad. And so the next day, I handed it in, and my teacher, I was a very good girl, and my teacher said, you need to go to the principal's office with me, and I just like burst out in tears. But she wanted me to read my poem with the morning announcements, and I remember being scooted up to that microphone, and the squat microphone on the principal's desk and reading it. And so that poem, about 3 months later, I was living with my grandparents then, and 2 men in Marine uniforms with white hats, I remember, came to the door and hearts were broken. And I remember thinking, I have this poem at least to remember him by. And I don't think that poems solve problems. Most people think poems just ask questions, but I do think they help us process grief and hold something that we can honor within us. And so that first poem there, and I actually put it in Next Door to the Dead and did not tell my editor that I wrote it when I was 8. And no one ever asked a question about it. So you'll find it in that book. But I think from early on I understood the power of writing, the power of using writing to hold in a place, even though you're moving on, to hold that place as sacred. So as I say, I knew from when I was a small child, I was not a believer, but I knew that the power of creativity and imagination was something that was incredibly divine and could never be ultimately explained or answered, but was incredibly powerful and was going to be powerful in my life. So, thank you. Sure.
And this is probably the English professor in me, I noticed that you have repeated the word pocking a couple of times in the poems that you read, and I was really interested in that, especially given our earlier conversations about haunting and the wake, the ripples or the impressions that are left behind, and I'm worried if there's some kind of speaking for people who don't have voices, especially in your poems. It sounds like about the graveyard and the people who are kind of haunting your own church and property.
Yeah, I don't know that I think about it in quite that way. I remember in my first book of poems, Laughing Sickness, it was basically, well, it wasn't really my thesis. The only thing I kept from my thesis was the title, and it took me a while to get it published. And I got it published when someone asked me, do you have a book together? And I was like, oh. And so I just had enough poems to pull together to put in a book. I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I remember reading from it the very first time in a bookstore and someone coming up to me saying, why are you writing so much about automobiles? And I thought, I am not writing about automobiles, but there is a car in every other poem in there. And so it made me keenly aware of the power of motifs, not themes, but motifs to build themes. And so sometimes my motifs are words that I keep coming back to, like POC was interesting, but that was a move to sort of try to unify my work from one book to another. So I do think about it in that way, using the same sort of words. I know in Next Door to the Dead there are a lot of birds in those poems, and obviously it's a poem about graveyards and lifting, and so that I recognized early on. I was just bound and determined I was not going to be caught unawares of my motifs ever again. And so I think it's a way to unify a book of poems. I love writing poems, but I adore putting a book of poems together, and I adore helping my students put books of poems together and looking for things like that will unify them all. So that's not really, I have a way of not answering the question, but talking about what I want to talk about. Sorry about that. Thank you all so much.
Our last author this morning is Rickey Fayne, who grew up in a small town in western Tennessee near where his debut novel, The Devil Three Times, is set. He is a graduate of the Mishner Center for Writers at the University of Texas and Northwestern University, and he teaches fiction writing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His fiction has appeared in magazines such as Guernica, Sewanee Review, Kenyon Review, Joyland, and American Fiction, and he has received notable mention in Best American Mystery and Suspense. Please welcome Rickey Fayne.
Hi. There's a book here, so what I'm going to do is read from the very beginning and then from a section that takes place right before World War I. Can you hear me okay? Okay. And I'll say a little bit too about the voice in this book. I think I drew a lot of inspiration from my father in writing this, so when I'm writing it in my head, I hear his voice, and when I hear my own voice, it feels weird. So I'll try to do it justice. In the beginning was the Word, but before the Word spoke, there was the devil. And he was hell-bent on sowing unrest and upheaval among the angels in heaven. You see, the devil loved nothing so much as stirring shit up, inciting Seraphim to fisticuffs. Jophiel and Michael all but threw hands when the devil doused the former's flaming sword and blamed the latter, and worst of all, confounding that tall, not terribly bright Archangel Gabriel's mind with questions like, how does God expect us to reconcile free will with providence divine? When God heard that, he said, now, devil, I done put up with your foolishness long enough. And before the devil could plead his case, God stomped his right foot, parted the clouds, and like a storm from paradise, the devil rained down. The devil sat there on the cold, dark earth with his head hung low, powerful, lonesome. And when God said, let there be light, he hid in the shadows. From there, he tempted Eve with his serpent, loosed Cain on Abel, and taught Noah how to drink and get naked. Now, Noah's folks like the devil, and the devil like Noah's folks. Anybody who can hold their liquor and keep their lies straight is never long in wanting friends. But he couldn't joke with Noah's folks like he could angels. They didn't banter, trade tall tales, kid, or have wolf tickets for sale. I mean, it was sad. Those poor folks couldn't cut the monkey if you held the knife for them. Case in point, one day the devil greeted Ham by asking him how he got to be so high on the hog, live so large, but Noah's son couldn't pick up what the devil put down. Just stood there as blank-faced and bewildered as the day he caught an eye full of his daddy's manhood. And so, though it pained his conscience, the devil had no choice but to trick Nimrod, Ham's grandson, into getting him home. You see, Nimrod claimed his might rivaled God's, ruled according to a merciless code. Nimrod's people couldn't do nothing without Nimrod's say-so. All the devil had to do to trick Nimrod was testify to all the ways God flouted his laws. God's crimes were as numerous as they were inimical, being everywhere and nowhere all at once, working in ways mysterious, and bringing the world into being without Nimrod's input. Who gave God leave to make the earth and the heavens? Nimrod certainly hadn't sanctioned it. What was more, the devil said, pacing back and forth in front of the court, the great maker added insult to injury by failing to present himself to Nimrod, stand trial, and account for his many offenses. How could Nimrod abide such impertinence unless, and here the devil paused for dramatic effect, could it be Nimrod was not as powerful as he led folks to believe? Was the only power Nimrod had over the people the power the people conceded? All at once the people turned to Nimrod, considering, how bad was this man really? Already they were plotting. Already they were scheming. Nimrod could feel it. His iron grip was slipping. Nimrod's only hope was to string his bow to back his boast, fire arrows into heaven and hit something, anything celestial. I'm no expert on the science of it, the devil said. But you might have a better shot at God if you aim from higher up. What if you built a tower? That just might be the best idea. Oh, sorry. That just might be the best idea anyone's ever had, Nimrod said, seeing at once the project's potential to unite the populace and divert attention from his gross incompetence. The devil could hardly believe folks had let someone so self-interested lead them. No matter. Once he climbed the Tower of Babel and spread his wings, he would be home, free of these terrible people. Just as the devil was in spitting distance of the pearly gates, though, God wrinkled his nose, confounded all the bricklayers, reached out from the clouds and flicked the tower down. The devil kicked around for a while after that, propping up empires and watching them fall, making waves wherever he found calm. Before long, he heard tell of God sending down his only son, which hurt the devil's feelings because even though they butted heads now and then, the devil always thought of himself as God's own. But he didn't harp on God counting him out and was ready to forgive his father's every trespass if only he could just get back home. And so the devil set out to find Jesus, God's favorite son, and caught up to him in the wilderness, hunting up four-leaf clovers, worrying the manes off dandelions, and watching the wind blow clouds about. The devil spent 40 days and 40 nights trying to reason with Jesus, brother to brother. Jesus, the devil said, I'm not evil. Not really. How could I be? Ain't nothing in me God ain't put there. Ain't a thing in my heart God didn't smile upon. All I want is to get back home. When Jesus heard the devil's words, he wept. Because you know Jesus real soft-hearted. Especially when it comes to fathers not doing right by their sons. Jesus himself didn't hear from his real daddy until he was damn near 31. Jesus said, devil, you really have touched me. My wings ain't strong enough to fly us both up to heaven, but if you can hold out just a little bit longer, I'll bend God's ear and see if we can't work out something. And so the devil bided his time for a few more eons, making bargains here, turning a soul or two away from God there, but his heart wasn't ever really in it. When he just about lost all faith in Jesus, Jesus came to the devil in a dream. I've been working overtime on God, Jesus said, and still he ain't budged. I'll keep after it, but in the meantime, I need you to help me. You heard about what's happening in Africa? The devil said he hadn't. Jesus said they're robbing up black folks from there and working them to death in America. Huh, the devil said, ain't that something? But he was only half listening. No human suffering could rival his own. All the devil took from Jesus' words was that Jesus had yet to find him a way home. Jesus hauled off and backhanded the poor devil. Listen to me, Jesus said, it is something, and you the somebody who needs to fix it. Ain't that God's problem? The devil asked, trying to rub some feeling back into his cheek, wondering what on earth had turned his sweet baby brother so evil mean. You think, Jesus huffed, but he's up in heaven twiddling his thumbs, says all humans are one race, acting like he can't see color from his gold throne. The devil was struck dumb. He ain't never once in his life imagined Jesus would fix his mouth to talk wet about God. And if you were struck too, then the joke's on you. Because if ain't but one thing in this world true, it's that Jesus loves him some black folks and black folks love them some Jesus. It's like they're the hand and he's the thumb, and he gets powerful angry when he sees them done wrong. Go south, Jesus told the devil. Free my people and watch out for them until I return. You do this for me, and I promise that one day I'll find a way to get you home. And when the devil woke, that's just what he did and is even now still trying to do. That's why black people have to go through hell to get free. And how come to this day the devil won't leave them be? So this next section, like I said, starts right before World War I. And I guess the only thing to know is that it involves two brothers. But they're only really brothers because one of their grandmothers sort of, I guess, bonded them together in a conjure ceremony. And so now their souls are tied together. It's one thing to know. The devil first appeared to Lewis in his father's church. It was while he was on his knees, praying for the strength to quell the lust he carried in his heart for his brother's wife, that the devil whispered to Lewis the same words of comfort he imparted to Cain when God unjustly favored Abel. To David, the evening Bathsheba tempted him. And to Judas, the day he learned Jesus would rather perfume his feet than feed the poor. Everything you got in you, God put there, the devil said. He wouldn't have put it in you if he didn't want you to act on it. In all his years, Lewis had never once strayed from the path his father set him on, the straight and narrow path of righteousness. But when Ernestine, the woman his adopted brother and best friend Junior was to marry, locked eyes with Junior over his mother's pecan pie, all that righteousness went right on out of him. Ernestine was not a stop and stare in the street kind of beauty. If you had asked anybody who knew her and Lewis's wife both, they would have told you Clementine, whom Reverend Walter all but forced his son to marry, had more to offer in terms of temperament and appearance. But something about the way Ernestine carried herself made Lewis want to look and keep on looking. For Junior, it was the way her hazel eyes fixed him every time she handed him a sandwich, which is why, though she was surly with him, he came to her lunch wagon day in and day out for the better part of 6 months before summoning the courage to ask after her. Ernestine knew from the way Junior cut his eyes from her to the menu and back that if she took him up on his offer to take a stroll, it would be the end of her life as a single woman in the city. And so she put him off, hoping that he would give up, and then one day, much to her dismay, he did. That day, her uncle parked just around the corner from the sawmill, and so she'd already prepared and laid aside Junior's dry roast beef sandwich. Junior was always the last in line, hanging back to have time enough to ask how her day was. But then the lunch rush came and went without him, and so she gave his sandwich to the little peanut-headed boy who ran up every day to see if there were any leftovers. After the third day of not seeing Junior, the boy grew bold enough to ask for mustard. "Where you been?" Ernestine asked when Junior finally came back. "Sick," Junior said, casting his eyes down. "Well, next time send word by somebody. Uncle Zeke was over here worrying himself sick about you." "Oh yeah," Junior said, brightening. "Maybe I should come back a little later and let him know I'm feeling better." "I think you should," she said. "I think he'd like that." They courted some months, a picture show here, a night out at the juke there, but what Ernestine really loved were the walks they took by the river. Every Friday, she helped her uncle close up, knowing Junior was waiting for her just around the corner. She'd bring along sandwiches, and the two of them would take a walk down to the bluffs and watch the wind worry the water. Junior wasn't much for talk, but he never grew tired of listening. Her sister Alice had been the same way, quiet, liable to say more with her eyes than her tongue. Before Alice followed that no-good husband of hers up to Chicago, Ernestine and her would stay up half the night talking. It was owing to Alice's husband that Ernestine vowed never to marry. He was all the time bossing Alice. It had been the same with their mother and Alice's father. She didn't see how anybody could want to saddle themselves with a husband. But if it was somebody like Junior, somebody sweet and quiet, then maybe, Ernestine thought when he invited her home to meet his family, maybe she could see her way around to it. Something funny that happened the night Junior brought her around his people, though. The dinner itself was pleasant enough, pretty much what she'd expected when he told her that the Reverend's family took him in after his folks passed on. Reverend Walter asked whether she'd accepted Christ into her heart. She had. Cora, the Reverend's wife, asked where her folks were and what they did. They were down in Mississippi. Her mother took in washing, and her mother's husband, her half-sister's father, cleaned the high school. Junior's folks come from around Jackson, Cora had said. Be sure to ask around. Make certain y'all ain't some kin. Cora's younger sister had let a boy she met uptown put his hand up her skirt once, and later it came out that he was their cousin by way of a roving uncle, her mother's brother. Ever since then, she'd been quick to warn folks to check whether they wanted to court someone with kin. But none of the questions Junior's adoptive parents put to Ernestine unnerved her the way Lewis's staring did. She could feel his eyes on her all through the dinner, but whenever she turned to face him, he either cast his eyes down at the plate or over to his wife, Clementine, who was sweet, Ernestine thought, but terribly dull. It's just nerves, Ernestine told herself, remembering the jolt of electricity that shot through her when, once the pecan pie had been served, she and Lewis locked eyes. I know Junior's going to put the question to me, and so my mind's doing everything it can to ruin it. At first, Lewis attributed his inability to turn away from Ernestine to her novelty. Ernestine's voice, soft and low, was only as sweet as honey because he'd never heard it before. He'd known Clementine all his life, and so he'd never had the chance to feel that way for her. Once his heart got used to Ernestine, Lewis lay awake at night hoping it wouldn't beat so goddamn hard every time he saw her. But then the wedding happened. And as he watched Ernestine walk down the aisle in what had to be the prettiest white dress anybody had ever seen, his inside seized up. He looked from her to Junior and back, walked around the side of the pulpit and vomited, feeling that the burning ache occasioning the call, the awful moment his father had warned him of, the instant in which he would be brought low by God's power and had finally come. Only it didn't want him to preach. It wanted him to bed his brother's wife. Something's got to be done, Clementine told Junior more than a month after he and Ernestine were wed. Lewis was no great prize. This Clementine knew. Knew it even the day he'd asked her to come with him to see the turtles take water. But the day before he'd taken her hand as she was going down the cotton rows filling her sack, she had a terrifying revelation. All she had seen and done was all she would ever see and do. After harvest season was over, there would be canning. After winter had come and gone, there would be planting, and so on and so forth, for as long as the good Lord saw fit to give her breath. Earlier that summer, Eula, Clementine's father's youngest sister, who, because she'd been born with a club foot and was unfit for farm labor, had been given an education, wrote to her about attending the Chicago Normal School where she taught. In the letter, Eula had offered to board Clementine and help her pay for school in exchange for help around the house. Her father refused to let her go, remembering the way all those books had turned his baby sister's head away from God. Do you really want to be that long away from your family? Away from everybody you love? He asked. What about your mother? Who's going to help her around the house? Of course not, Clementine had told him. Of course she didn't want to leave her family. And so when Lewis offered, not for the first time, to take her to the clearing beyond the creek and make her feel like a woman, she relented, not because she fancied Lewis, but because fooling around was a thing to do she had not yet done. It was uncomfortable at first, but it felt all right enough in the end. But no matter how good it felt, it wasn't worth Lewis's sweat, feeling him writhe all over her. And so she slipped back into her Sunday best and thought no more about it until a little over a month later when she changed her sanitary napkin, and for the third day in a row it was clean. Clementine's mother, who insisted on doing her daughter's laundry, was the first to notice, and remembering the way she'd slipped off with Lewis that one Sunday, went to Clementine's father about it. He'll do right by her, Clementine overheard Reverend Walter assure her father over Sunday afternoon sakatimi cake. I'll make certain of it. And just like that, the door to that other life, the one in Chicago Eula had written to her of, closed, leaving her with a shiftless husband and a colicky baby. Now all Clementine wanted was to live decently, to make a good home for herself and her son, but Lewis couldn't even allow her that. Couldn't do her the courtesy of at least pretending to love her. By the time Clementine took it upon herself to confront Junior, Lewis was dropping by his house to gawk at Ernestine damn near daily. Nothing out of the way had happened yet, but it was clear to everyone that Lewis visited for no other reason than to take whatever pleasure he could from Ernestine's company. It's disrespectful, Clementine continued, shaking her head. Disrespectful to you and me both. The night Junior came home and met Lewis leaving out of his front door, he didn't think much of it. He'd been drinking and shooting dice uptown. America had entered the war in Europe, and they planned to use colored boys, which meant Army pay, Army benefits. He wasn't in any rush to go fight, but he was happy for the men he worked with. And so, for the first and only time, he'd gone out drinking with them. Before that day, he'd never drank. And if it wasn't owing to the mule knowing the way home, he wouldn't have made it home. He looked up from the porch where he'd fallen out and found his brother stepping over him. Lewis, Junior called up, how the hell you get all the way up there? It's not that I'm up, Lewis said. It's that you're down. Huh, Junior said, laughing. I guess that's one way to look at it. It wasn't until the next morning, after Ernestine had cooked up sausage, scrambled eggs, and flapjacks, that Junior put together what all Lewis and Ernestine had been up to. If he were another kind of man, the kind of man his father had been, he might have raised a hand against her, but he wasn't. He was Eliza's son, the firstborn of her to draw breath after 2 stillbirths. And Eliza's son would never raise his hand against a woman. And so, though he couldn't help but see on Ernestine everywhere his brother had touched, Junior sat down at the table across from his wife, the only woman he had or ever would love, and shared his thoughts of the coming war. You come to cut me? Lewis asked the night he found Junior leaning up against the side of the barn with a switchblade drawn. He'd come out to milk Beulah, the only heifer who was not then pregnant. You ain't left much of a choice. I won't fight you, Lewis said, dropping the milking pail at his feet. I know you won't, Junior said. Junior walked up to his brother, took his switchblade, and with one swift swing, sliced a red line from the bottom of Lewis's eye to the top of his jaw. Junior didn't want to hurt Lewis. He loved his brother. But something had to be done. The situation had gotten out of hand. He felt like he was on the back of a galloping horse that didn't know what woe meant. It was like the fever dream he'd had after his mother passed. In it, he was laid out on the table, and she was standing over him. She leaned down to kiss him, but no matter how hard she strained, she couldn't reach him. That's how he felt with Lewis. He could see him but not reach him, not with the switchblade, nor with the poorly aimed rifle shot that followed it months later. After Clementine had staunched the bleeding in Lewis's shoulder, Junior's bullet had only grazed him, Lewis found himself drunkenly jimmying open the back door of his father's church. Had Lucille been alive, Lewis would have laid it all at her doorstep, found the right root, and used it to fix him. But there were other root workers, of course. But Lewis, being the reverend son-in-law, he was too ashamed to go to them. In the afternoon before the evening, Lucille, and Lucille's the root worker / Lewis's grandmother. In the afternoon before the evening, Lucille was to close her eyes to life. She set out to make peace with her son, Walter. I got a brother and a husband I'll never see again, Lucille told Cora when she opened the door. I can't bear to say the same of my son. Cora invited Lucille in and served her the tea cake she'd been saving for Walter, who, that afternoon, was out visiting the sick and shut-in. Lucille and Cora had not spoken since the latter came to the former begging her to fix it so that Walter would make her honest. Lucille, who didn't like the way the girl had thrown herself in front of Walter, turned her away. No words had passed between them since. I was thinking of putting in some tulips when it warms, Cora ventured. I got some nice bulbs from Miss Reed. I can see about getting some for you too if you want. I don't have no use for tulips, Lucille said, glowering down at the cherubs carved into her son's coffee table and wondering how a boy she'd raised could stomach such frippery. Where's my son? I need to see him. He's out doing his visiting. He'll be back directly. Are you feeling all right, Miss Lucille? Cora asked, seeing that the woman had paled. Would you like to lie down for a spell? Yes, Lucille said, for all of a sudden she'd grown terribly cold. Yes, I believe I would. Cora showed Lucille to her in Walter's bedroom. The poor woman was shivering, pulled the quilt over her, and fetched her a hot toddy. You love my son, don't you? Lucille asked, after Cora took her hand and rubbed it like no one had since her mother passed. Dearly, Cora said. That's good, Lucille said, closing her eyes. Real good. Be sure to do as much for you as you do for him. You somebody too. The great maker, looking out over all his children from on high, saw Lucille laid up, shook his head, sat back on his throne, turned to the angel Gabriel and said, call me death. Like a clap of thunder, Gabriel's voice boomed out through all the halls of the Father's mansion and echoed all through the streets of heaven until it reached that black shadowy place where death stood brushing down his pale white horse, his scythe at the ready. Go down, God told death. Go down to Laurent, fetch up Lucille and bring her home. And so death took up his pale horse's reins and rode on past the pearly gates, on past the bright line of sky that separates earth from heaven, on over the Mississippi, on past Walter, who was just then making his way up the lane and did not stop until he met his brother at the crossroads. Stand aside, Death cried. I'm about my Father's business and I will not tarry. I know whose business you're about, the devil told Death. I was there when the plans were laid out in the beginning, but that woman he sent you after, I'm the one who watched over her. It ain't on you to see her to the other side. It's on me. And so Death, taking pity on his poor misguided brother, climbed down out of his saddle and out of the ghostly hollows of his far-seeing eyes watched as the devil made his way to Walter's house where, by now, Walter had taken his wife's place at his dying mother's side, reached down into Lucille, lifted her up out of her body, and flew her home on his own wings. It rained the day they laid Lucille's body to rest, but still the people of Laurent, the black people at least, came. They came because she had brewed the tea that eased their mother's passing. They came because she had cured their firstborn's colic, stilled their tired wombs, and kept their husbands from straying. They came because when everyone else thought they had lost their minds, she crossed the threshold of their houses, searched behind their wood stoves, under their sofas, between their mattresses, and did not stop until she found whatever charm had been laid against them. They came because they had not believed witches in league with the devil could die. They came because she was their pastor's mother. They came because she was the last living among them to have known slavery. Say what you will about my mother, Walter said, leveling his teared eyes at the congregation, but she knew Jesus. She wouldn't call him by that name, but still she knew him. You know how I know she knew Jesus? Because Jesus is love, and nobody loved like how my mother loved. She was a powerful woman, my mother. I've seen her do things no one living should have the power to do. But you know what, church? Every one of those things, each and every one of those miraculous things was done in service to somebody else. Yes, it was. Even now, my mother's up there with St. Peter, laying all her sins on one side of the scale and her good works up on the other, and I don't need to see it to know which way it's going to tip. No, church, I'm not worried for my mother one bit, because she took all that power God gave her and put it into this here community, into us. Yes, church, my mother knew Jesus because Jesus is love, and nobody loved like how Lucille loved. And so I know just which way that scale's going to tip. But the question I have for you, church, the one I want to put to you is this. Do you know? Do you know which way your scale's going to tip? One day, church, one day soon, Gabriel is going to blow that horn. He's going to blow that horn, and each and every one of us is going to have to account for how we spent our time here on earth. My mother spent all 77 of her years serving. How will you spend yours? Walter's question resounded in Lewis's mind as he and Junior, alongside the deacons, hefted his grandmother's red oak casket onto their shoulders, and carried it out the front doors of the church and downhill to the sycamore tree. As they shoveled the overturned dirt that, owing to the rain, was more mud now than anything else, he vowed to honor Lucille's memory by staying true to the brother Lucille had gifted him all those years ago. And now, months later, as Lewis knelt before the altar, all the shame of being too weak to keep his vow came down upon him. It was in this pitiful state that the devil found Lewis. And after Uncle Sam called both Lewis and Junior's numbers, answered his prayers, doing for him just as he'd done for David. Thank you. Oh, no.
As a student wanting to get into novel craft, I felt the need to ask, what were some of the challenges in writing something that follows one character interacting with so many generations?
Yeah, I feel like the trick is to not know that's what you're doing at the beginning. But yeah, I feel like part of it was, I think grappling with so much time, I think I thought about it in terms of relationships, not as terms of where we were in time. Like, for example, like thinking about Lucille, I thought of her not as, oh, this conjure woman who was alive like right after slavery, but this other character's grandmother, right? And then he's the grandfather of another character. So when you think about them in terms of like familial relationships, then I feel like the time sort of falls away and you just think, this is one person that loved another, and this is another person that loved another. And so I went backwards that way.
Hi, I was going to kind of preface my question by saying I read in the Southern Review that they called your novel a Faustian bargain that echoes through time. And, you know, in the complexity of looking at all those spiritual traditions and those themes, and then you've got the vast scope of the generations, 8 generations from the slave ship on. And I know you mentioned your father's voice. So where did really the seed of the idea for this book come from? You know, what drew you to this subject?
Yeah, so it kind of started as the first short story I ever tried to write. And I kept revising it and not liking it, and someone gave me the advice to write the back history of the characters in the story. And I got so caught up in their backstories and their parents and grandparents and uncles that I just I kind of abandoned the short story. Well, I kind of left it in on the advice of some friends who said, no, it's working, leave it in as a chapter, and I still hate that it's there, but I suppose that happens. But yeah, I mean, so in a lot of ways, this book kind of grew out of a failed dissertation. I was writing about spirit possession in 20th century African American literature, and I found that when I started writing fiction, I had the same sort of preoccupations and obsessions. So I was thinking about, for example, like the devil is more so, he's not necessarily the Judeo-Christian devil, he's more of a trickster figure, right? And that came from that research. So I feel like I just kind of like followed those interests and sort of thought about the people around them.
Hey, so I'm in the MFA program, and we, during discussion, were kind of debating about the role of the devil in this novel, and whether he's like an anti-hero or if he's still kind of like a negative force, but he's more interactive as a part of, rather than like Jesus or God, that, you know, with the human. So I was just kind of wondering, what do you see the role of the devil in this novel?
Yeah, so I see him as his main goal is to, well, one, get back into heaven, but I think he does that by trying to free people. And after slavery, that definition sort of takes on some nuance, like what does it mean to free someone? Sort of free, because he's sitting there in the moment after emancipation, like, you know, and the gates haven't opened up. He's not on his way back in. And so he interprets that in a bunch of different radical ways, right? So he sees freedom a lot differently than other people might. Like, so for him, it's about opening people's minds and thinking about things from another vantage, right? Like, so when he's telling Lewis, like, go ahead and sleep with your brother's wife, it's that's what God wants. He's sort of, in his mind, he's freeing him from sort of like a conventional understanding of love and relationships. And so that freedom works differently for each person. So I don't know, I feel like he sees conventions as sort of a cage. And so as he's working with people in this post-emancipation moment, it's not necessarily he's encouraging them to do the best thing for themselves, but what he thinks might be the thing that takes them out of that box.
I had another question. When you mentioned that some of this maybe grew out of a dissertation in a different sort of way, so obviously it's a creative work, but did you do any kind of background research, or did you, have to do fact checking on anything, or is it just purely creative?
I did a little, a lot of the research took place before I ever knew it was going to be used for fiction. So I spent a lot of time in the Herskovitz Library at Northwestern University, and like some time at the Du Bois Library at UMass Amherst doing archival research. But once I knew I was writing fiction, I only looked into my hometown. And so the town here is very loosely based on my hometown. And so I did research and sort of lifted some of the like random historical facts. Like one thing that I really tried to shoehorn in here that really didn't work was there's this story of my hometown that this is during the Civil War. These two Confederate soldiers supposedly came up to the town and said, hey, there's a band of disbanded rebels, and they're planning to rob you guys. So everybody get together and we're gonna help you fight them off. And so they all gathered in the town square and waited with their weapons, and they waited and waited and no one came. And then when they finally went home, they saw that all their houses had been robbed. so that was they were the band of rebels. And so instead of getting them to put up a fight, they just they were, and when I say rebels, I mean sort of like Confederate soldiers who had abandoned the army and just sort of threw out. Yeah. But I couldn't find a place for it.
A new story.
So you've actually sort of partially answered my question. I was wondering if you could talk about your approach to having placed this novel in a single place over 8 generations, about your approach to the world building of that place and how you saw it and how you envisioned it and how you envisioned it changing over the course of the book.
Yeah, I feel like it started with me, I guess, growing up really, really wanting to leave my hometown and just desperate to get out, God, I can't wait. So I can get out of here. But then when I left, I kind of was like, actually, you know what? Everyone I love is sort of there. And it has this deep history. My family's been there since the 1870s. And so I was I was really just drawing on that. So trying to find a way to, one, grapple with the history of the place, but then also to think about everything I loved from it. So they stayed there because that's what my family did, right? They actually they sort of did a reverse. They went the opposite direction of after emancipation. There was no going north. They went further south and planted their roots and stayed there.
When I was listening to you, I kept hearing echoes of the conversation that the devil and God have with each other about Job in the book of Job. It's that type of relationship where the devil is more of an irritant than a truly evil figure, that it's God that does the bad things or lets the bad things happen.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's something I always thought about sitting in church, not listening to the sermon. I was just like, well, if God made the devil, then all the stuff the devil's doing is kind of your fault a little bit, right? That's a closed system. You made everything, and you could supposedly take it out, so you must want this on some level. So, yeah, exactly. All right. Brighton, yeah, so I'm from Brighton, Tennessee, and Tipton County, which is the county right above Shelby County, which is Memphis. Yeah, so just north of Memphis. Yeah, another fun fact about the area, supposedly before the Civil War, they had a port that rivaled Memphis, but they thought that the Union was going to be able to use that port, so they burned it down. But then on their own, because we don't want them to use it, but then no one ever set foot in the area or tried to use it more, so they just sort of shot themselves in the foot. All right, thank you.
Just one more round of applause for our authors this morning. Just two quick announcements for you before we adjourn for lunch, to just make sure you look around your area and not leave any personal belongings behind. That happens more frequently than you might imagine. And also, not to forget the evaluations that are inside the programs. There is a box on the round table out in the lobby where you can deposit them when you are finished. And with that, I will say we will see you back here at 1:30. Enjoy lunch.